Okay.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Hope Axis. I think this is my 50th episode, but honestly, I have no idea. I'm sitting here with Sarah Haider. I've been a long time fan, and then yesterday I learned how to pronounce her name. This is what comes with just reading about stuff all the time, and I'm so happy that I ventured into actually talking to people and talking about things. We will be talking a little bit about God or the lack thereof, just to like keep these festive days light and fun. We will decide by the end of this episode if there is a God, and the comments will be open under the episode. Sarah, you and I, before our viewers and listeners joined us, discussed that in some weird way we are technically boomers.
Yeah.
Our atheism, our spiritual quest for severe signs of boomerism in the past 20 years. We were fans or even collaborators with some of the great new atheists that people used to or still love reading and listening to. And then something changed, right? We're sitting here, it's December 30th, 2024, almost 2025. And even just in the past couple of days, major shifts have been happening when it comes to new atheist sensibilities. Steven Pinker's famous resignation that we will talk about a little bit more from his peers for a good reason, but also Neil Ferguson converting to Christianity, or at least coming out of the closet about a previous conversion. You and I were recently hanging out with Ian Hersey and went a little bit more deeply about new atheist concerns. So I'm really curious where you are seeing us right now when it comes to new atheism and how it might inform your work with the ex-Muslims of North America.
Yeah. So I'm not active in the atheist community at all anymore or organizing, but I did co-found an organization that is specifically geared towards people who left Islam. And I did that work for, about a decade, and this was like my only real job experience, I have to say, which is always, it's always interesting to learn in that way. You don't really have mentors, teaching you things from the top, but you just got to figure it out and make a lot of messes. And so I did that for quite some time. So my route through new atheism was, I got thrown into the conversation as this, new young leader in this new organization that was obviously very interesting to people because the conversation about Islam is very interesting to people. And especially at that time, and we're talking, 2013, 2014 was when I really first started speaking out publicly, and there were not many people who were talking about the specific challenges of Islam. It was just, it was Ayan Hirsi Ali, it was Salman Rushdie kind of, but really nobody else. And then there were these like kind of far right extremist voices that had some things to say about Islam, but they also had a lot of things to say about immigrants and all of that. So there was that perspective, but it felt as if the kind of perspective that I had about the faith, about the challenges of the faith, the orientation I had towards Muslims as a people, like the compassion I felt for them as a people, because this is my family, these are my parents, I felt was missing in the conversation, with the exception of, some new atheist types that were able to, I think, walk a line as best as it is possible to walk a line between, criticizing the faith on the one hand, unflinchingly, while also remaining compassionate about the people and their human rights and civil liberties and all that. Of course, you can argue not anyone did it perfectly.
Basically, the available kind of ex-Muslim explorations were either this like stone cold rationalist kind of the Dawkins, Hitchens, let's be more reasonable white men take on it, or it was like political racism, right? And there was not kind of for real normal people dealing with like just normal questions.
Yeah, I mean, and I have always been in the Dawkins camp, like temperamentally, and like I remember the first time I listened to Richard Dawkins, it was just some YouTube video or something. Like it was some little clip somewhere. And I remember thinking, who is this old man? And you don't normally, you expect to have resonance with a certain kind of person. People often ask me, like, well, did you look up to such and such female brown hero when you were coming up? And I was like, I love that video of Richard Dawkins. And I remember watching it and thinking, this is my tribe. I think like him. I like the way he thinks. It resonates with me, and I would like to see more of that. And I think that my own approach might be a little bit softer than his, and that's just the estrogen. There's something about maybe there's just something about the quality of me being female when I come into a conversation. I think people just soften it up in their own heads anyway. But I wanted to be a part of that debate, and I think that I was able to, bring a different perspective as somebody who's coming in from within the Muslim community, and it was still part of the Muslim community because I'm still in touch with my family. I'm not ostracized fully. There are some people, of course, who don't talk to me, but my parents, I'm still relating to my parents. So I had this active engagement, and I think I was hoping I could bring a different perspective to it. So that was sort of my advent, in my intro into the new atheist world. And I definitely resonated with it for a long time. And I felt as if there was something there. I wanted people to be able to grapple with the rational arguments that they were making. And I felt as if they were getting, smeared quite a bit as racists and white supremacists and whatever, xenophobes. And I tried my best to, be that human shield and say, look at me. I'm an immigrant. I'm a woman. I'm all these things. But of course, there's something about that logic that is just corrupted, like, and so you can't really fight fire with fire. But I tried. And then as the years went on, we faced new challenges. There's a rise of like wokeism or whatever it is that you want to call it, but ways of thinking that I felt to be quite regressive. And I found that even within the atheist community, so this is my perspective from within movement atheism, organized atheism, which is to say like the actual organizations that are set up to do work, to, let's say, fight for a separation of church and state, for the rights of atheists and non-theists here and like globally. And I found that here's this place of supposedly like deeply rational people, very science, like we love science, we love like logic. And despite all of that, I felt as if they were unable to meet the challenges of this new wave of thinking. And they were also unable to meet the challenges of, the alienation, the spiritual needs of people. I was hopeful that we could have this kind of secular community that could fill the gap of religious community. I have I have many complicated thoughts about that and the possibility of that. I tried it in my own way, and it may be possible. It might just be very difficult. So there's a lot we can talk about when it comes to that.
Intellect, right? As the secular community. I'm so curious. So you famously started questioning your faith around 15, 16, right? So kind of at the when you were a teenager, which I think is a kind of a traditional era for people either to convert to a religion more seriously or to leave one. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And as I understand, it was a very intellectual thing at first, right? So some things didn't add up to you logically, the teachings of Islam. And maybe that's also why, when we question religion from a rational point of view, it's kind of normal to first be very drawn to the rationalist argument about it. But I'm really curious, was there something at the time that you felt that the new atheist heroes were wrong about, that you understood about Islam from the inside? And what was your first entry into contribution. You talk about making it softer. What does that actually mean?
I think maybe softer is the wrong perspective. I think maybe the right way of phrasing it is more personalized. I noticed that the conversation of, atheists, like new atheists, was very much focused on terror, because that was I think what really ignited the conversation, and what really got new atheism going was the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and what we saw, the aftermath, the war on terror, and all the terror attacks that seemed to be everywhere at that time. I think that woke people up to what religion could do in certain forms, and people started taking aspects of religious ideology a lot more literally, and recognizing that at least some people do take it literally, and what does that mean for us? So I think that
because the narrative had been, like, for those who don't remember the 80s and the 90s, was that with the kind of end of history, we are all becoming more reasonable and less religious and less literally believing in certain things. And then 9/11 happens, and the West realizes with shock that, both inside America and outside it, there are people who are like, this text is from God, so shut up.
Yeah. And it's interesting because even back in college, I remember when we discussed the secularization thesis, like the whole world, we're all about to get a little more secular. As we get more liberal, as we get more advanced and modern, we're going to get more secular.
Magic.
It's sort of an inevitable thing. Well, and it did seem to be happening in Europe. And then there was this United States being kind of an exception to the rule that was intriguing to people.
I have Tocqueville right now because I'm going to be hosting the Interintellect reading series. So if people want to read Tocqueville, it's only 800.
It's only a Bible in itself.
Yeah. This is the year to read it, guys. 2025 is Tocqueville's year. He's making a Hegelian comeback.
Right. So I remember there was so much discussion about that. And we saw, I think, with the war on terror changed some things in the discourse in America. And then suddenly we saw the rise of nuns, which is to say, like, the rise of people who didn't consider themselves formally aligned with any religion. Mainline Protestantism, in particular, seemed to be making a huge decline. And that was kind of replaced by this nun population, some of whom were atheists, some of whom were agnostic, some of whom were spiritual but not religious, but not formally aligned with any kind of faith. And in the beginning, I thought of this as a positive development. Now I'm less sure, which is to say, I see there being aspects of it that are positive and aspects of it that might not be very positive. It's early days, so I think we're seeing this shakeup happen in real time. It's kind of exciting, but nerve-wracking also. But I saw within the atheist communities that I was part of that it felt as if it was hard for them to grapple with new problems without a pre-existing set of values and principles. I thought that we did have values and principles that were sufficient, these like human rights, civil liberties, etc. But I don't actually think that those are sufficient. I think those are ideals that you work up to post already having a certain idea of what the world is, and what truth is. So I'm all over the place.
Right, the God-shaped hole. You came up on it as well.
Right, and it's interesting because I personally,
or maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but
I mean,
there's something in the kind of secular, liberal political discourse that, without some mythical backing, somehow feels that it makes no sense. Right, like equality.
It seems easy to spiral out into other kinds of dogmatic beliefs. I mean, that's how I would put it. In that, this is a very clunky way of putting it. But in an ideal world, if I could choose between having like the old religions and this new non-religious, liberal, humanistic, democracy, I would choose the latter. But that is not the choice that I now find before me. Instead, I find the choice between these old religions that have, these long traditions and histories, and mimetic value, and new secular religions, new dogmas, new ways of trying to organize, that seem to be maybe more harmful. So if that's a choice before me, this older, time-tested religion, as opposed to a brand new way of thinking that may or may not be very harmful. I think maybe this is where we get into some tricky conversations for me.
I mean, I don't want to force you to do it, but do you want to give maybe some more benign examples of the very harmful pseudo-religions that you have been observing? Because, I mean, that's also part of my theory here, that the kind of dialectic of returning to religiousness for normal people, so not the meme lords, is driven by a fear of other alternatives. That I think a lot of people who are millennials, I think this is a very millennial kind of cohort problem, are noticing bigger evils. And then, at least with the world religions, you actually know what it is because it has been printed for hundreds of years, the same text, and you know what it is, right? Whereas everything else around us is very kind of hypertextual and constantly mutating. But I'm really curious what was the point for you when you started feeling the kind of decay within the atheist or even the ex-Muslim movement? And then we can, get all the way up to Steven Pinker's resignation. Yesterday, was it 2 days ago? From the Freedom from Religion group. And do you feel that your journey is aligned with the other people's experiences about that? Or do you feel alone with it? I'm very curious.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I guess I do feel a little bit alone in that I'm more in Steven Pinker's camp, in the sense of feeling like that final boomer, like the last person who still is waving a certain kind of flag. However, I'm seeing what's happening around me. I'm seeing what other people seem to need, and the emergent properties of a society that's organized around something other than religion. Which is to say, I don't know what it's organized around, and I think that makes them more vulnerable to getting pulled into fads. And the fad that's getting me into a lot of trouble has been the conversation around gender identity. And we don't have to get into it because I don't know how interested your audience is in that.
Absolutely. And this is exactly what I'm trying to get at. Like, I think there are a couple of causes for everybody where you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't think people approach these gigantic problems of whether we should live on the right or the left or religiously or in an atheist way. It's more about there is a very particular question where you realize that one system or the other is either not working or it's completely fake or some kind of combination of the two.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. My perspective might not be shared by your audience fully, but this is honestly where I'm coming from, is that I think that there are huge incoherences in the understanding of gender identity as it is sold by activist groups, and by activist groups, I'm actually including the ACLU in this, which is really tragic, and I wish I didn't have to. Which is to say that they follow this very circular understanding of gender, very personalized understanding of what it is. You are whatever you say you are. You are a woman. If you say you are a woman, if you think you're a woman, then you're a woman. That it irks me on the same level that of the same kind of person that became very irritated at logical inconsistencies in the Quran, becomes very irritated by that kind of logic. And I would like to be able to have a more open and honest conversation about what's going on. And I found that, this was just not allowed within the circles that I was swimming in the secular community. Now, I think that there are definitely many atheists out there who are not connected to movement atheism, who do see what I see, and they have the kind of skeptical approach that I have. But that I found that was more or less not, it was not the case in movement atheism. And there was a sort of rapid consensus that built around the kind of understanding that activist groups were giving out of, this is what's going on, this is what it is, here's a thing called gender, and this is what people are going through. Now, I do not deny that people are going through something. I do not deny that people have maybe a sense of an ease or a tension or even great pain relating to what they understand to be their sex. I just wouldn't explain it in the same way that the ACLU might explain it. And I wish that we were able to have an open conversation about that, because I think that would be helpful to everybody. I think that would be helpful to people who believe that they have the wrong gender identity as well. But it was just fascinating to me to see suddenly the winds shift around me, and everybody was now signing on board with this new understanding of ourselves as, human beings. We used to have this like binary sexual understanding, and then you have, your own personal characteristics. Maybe you're a little bit more masculine, a little bit more feminine. Maybe you're gay, maybe you're straight. There was, a lot to choose from. And now we have this new framework, and it felt as if that framework was not questioned. And then even as I tried to question it, I found that was very unwelcome. And I was surprised by this, because these are the rationalists, these are the science people. These are the people who supposedly understand what dogma is, not just in this one applied way, like dogma of fundamentalist Christianity, dogma of fundamentalist Islam, but people who supposedly understood it more broadly, more philosophically, and could see the same kind of patterns playing out in the secular context. And I was surprised to find that there was just no understanding of it at all. And the social stigma and truly like punishments that were levied out against people who even dared to question it a little bit, just a little bit, was incredible for me to witness. And I've never seen closed-mindedness like this up close, except for when I was talking to...
The question crime, right? That even
right.
Just answer the question.
Right. If you are in the position, right, if you're in the position that you're even asking it, that reveals so much about you, about where you already are. And I found that to be just deeply shocking and disorienting. And then it made me feel as if...
kind of epistemologically wrong. Like it goes against like one of the core facets of human nature, which is the ability to ask questions and examine things as kind of the learning process, like Socrates, I don't know.
These are the people who say that this is what they want. These are the people who talk about critical thinking the way Christians talk about, like forgiveness. Like they think of it, this is their value. So to see them abandon it, it just so quick, so rapidly, was shocking, but it was also interesting. It made me think, okay, maybe there's something about the way that it is that people think, that human beings think, and how much our social environment plays into, our ability to reason. So it also opened up some interesting tracks for me intellectually, and I began reading a lot more about the mind and how it is that we actually think. And I think I've arrived at a far more interesting model of the human mind and reason. And it might not be more true, but it is more interesting to me because now I have all these new questions.
Do you want to speak to that a little bit? I'm so curious. It's like you've reached rationalism V2 201.
I mean, I don't know if I'm ready to talk about it because I don't know if I've fully studied it in a way that makes me comfortable, proselytizing about my.
But there is something going on, or maybe it's a 102 actually. I don't know how many rationalisms you've had, but it's really curious to me. But so just to really dumb it down, your argument is that somehow a strand of wokeism ate up the atheist movement, or the at least religion critical movement, because it introduced non-religious problems to the question that became so unquestionable so fast that it kind of stopped all other questioning from happening as well? Or how do you see the structure of this?
That's an interesting question, because it's not just the atheist and secular community that's been swallowed up by this. It's really every institution to some degree, except for those that are explicitly right-wing or explicitly religious. So the model that I'm on now is that there's something about the liberalism that I love so much, and the conditions of modernity that open up the avenue, like make us vulnerable to the pressures of wokeism. And the people who are less vulnerable to it tend to be the people who have an alternative system that is very, strongly and deeply rooted. So if you are, a conservative Muslim, you can resist wokeism. You can resist it really well because you have this alternative system that has its own problems, of course. But nevertheless, the benefit is that it can resist this. And I don't want to be like, I don't want people to come out of it thinking that now I'm saying let's convert back into let's be conservative fundamental.
Like, you understand that there is some kind of benefit. I mean, that's always the kind of utilitarian argument, and that's actually my pro-religion argument as well. That there are the 6 or 5+1 world religions that somehow survive this extreme Darwinism of hundreds or of thousands or millions of religions competing with each other. And for some reason, these 5+1 religions have been able to provide something to large masses of people that these many people decided individually or collectively to keep these things alive. Right?
Like maybe it wasn't even a decision, right? I mean, it wasn't it's just that they were the people who survived. They were the people who were able to resist. And the way that I think of it now is that the advantage might just be in preventing certain more harmful ideologies into entering like the mimetic like sphere, and destabilizing the civilization. So I think there's a floor that it creates that's good. There's a floor. I always saw it from the perspective of, okay, there's also a ceiling, like there's also like we need to break past what traditional religions brings, because we got to explore the stars and we have to see the universe, and this is what's and the scientific rationalist understanding of the world is going to take us to the stars. So I focus on the ceiling.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about the floor, which is unfortunate.
No, it's awesome.
But yeah, maybe it's great. It's good. It's good.
The top without the base.
Yeah.
That's where we take off from. That's fascinating. And do you think that your realization, I'm just kind of like trying to prove myself wrong here, because for me, I see multiple different trends when it comes to returning to religiosity, not necessarily religion, but like religiosity, like religious practice. I see multiple different reasons why groups of people do it. One is, the meaning crisis that Ayan is talking about. One is strongly political and cultural, like the West is for Christians or the East is for Muslims, like whatever your take is, or even forced upon you from a revolutionary government in some cases. I see this fear of nihilism and postmodern bullshit, basically the pseudo religions, the lack of the baseline, how uncontrollable groups without some kind of common knowledge or unifying, mimetic system, how at danger everybody is and how lonely you are, like the enemy. And my feeling here is that these are relatively independent from each other, and you could bring together, you and I, when we're talking with Ayan and all these other people in Miami recently, like these are very different neo-religious people. Like they are neo-religious for very different reasons. Like some people are literally neo-religious because they want a trad wife who will bear their kids, right? Like you have that as well. But I feel like these different strands strengthen each other by adding up into what is perceived as a kind of zeitgeist. And when something is perceived as a zeitgeist, it will trigger non-ideological joiners who are joining for the fad, who are joining because that's where all the cool kids are, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm curious if I might be completely wrong, and maybe there's a kind of mitochondrial Eve shared ancestor underneath all of these different strands. And are we just scared? Are we all just scared? Or are we all scared, but in very different ways? So what do you think? And how are you scared?
I think that was really a really great breakdown that of the different strands that are feeding into the same phenomena. And I agree with you, and I see it too. My concern only is that with some of these there's these new young people who have rediscovered tradition, it seems to me as if there's a cosplaying kind of LARPy element to it sometimes. I come from a faith, like a tradition. I practice, I believe,
where you have
an actual belief.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't so much something I could just pick and choose. It was, there was so much of it that I had no choice over. And that is actually part and parcel of what religion, in my view, necessarily forces upon you. Like it takes away choice in order to provide you with the sense of safety or real safety, and community. And I wonder if it is possible to have one and not the other. I wonder if it is possible to have a reinvigoration of Christianity in the United States without also undoing some of the logic that led to like the gay rights movement and all these other individualistic human rights movements that many of us have personally benefited from. And in my own mind, I see there being a tension that at some point is going to be confronted. And I don't know where we're going to come out on the other side. So that's sort of where I'm a little bit concerned, but I'm watching. I'm an outsider, so I'm watching and seeing where it goes.
You're a hard-earned status as an outsider. Like with just like 15 years of hard work, easy, effortless.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it is, but there is something interesting and new that is opening up a lot of new questions for me that I see it in my my peer group. Not just we know about Ayan and some famous voices that have become more religious, but I've seen it in younger people too. I think family formation has a lot to do with it, as well as the alienation of modern internet-based society. I think there's a desire to have this kind of connection that I think that people my age and younger only know about in this sort of romantic sense, because I don't know if, especially people younger than me, really experienced it,
and also like a semantic problem. We were talking about human rights, and like I had this realization at some point that, and I'm not talking about the Harari intersubjective nonsense. Like, no, what I'm talking about is we have these vestiges, these kind of remnants of religious language, for instance, in liberal democracy, like that people are equal. Like, okay, but equality in front of what? Right?
Yeah.
Like the whole idea was religious, and then we removed these characters from the story, and the story then it still makes sense because otherwise we would not still have liberal democracy, but it's very easy to either replace that thing in front of whom you are equal, for instance, by a populist dictator, right?
Yeah.
It's you the love
Right.
and care that you seek and the safety and the belonging, or for somebody convincing enough to come and say that the whole thing is bullshit.
Right. I think it's easy to
Actually,
hijack.
we are the smart people and the dumb people, the white people and the rest, or the east, whatever it is for you. And the other thing that I think people, because I assume that most people don't meditate on like the core values of liberal democracy every day, like I do and you do. But like maybe they feel that, okay, they have these core archetypal staples of feelings in their lives, right? Love for their spouse or their child or their friend. There is respect and there is hate and envy and anger and jealousy and ambition and fear, guilt. And without some kind of shared understanding of what these are, what are we supposed to do with these feelings? Like even love is too much for one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
if you've ever cried at night for some boy or girl, you know that even a good feeling is too overwhelming for a person. And we had this ritual takes on it to kind of try to bear these feelings. And I feel like we were supposed to understand this scientifically, content. And then I feel like science kind of failed us there. And it didn't fail us because of the Carl Sagan thing that it doesn't give us meaning. I think science gives plenty of meaning to people who really do science as their technique. But do we understand love any better or hate or anger after 80 years of like frying brains with different see-through machines? I'm not sure. Or at least not something that's practically helpful in my daily life, you know?
Yeah, these questions become too big without some kind of a clearing or some kind of lens, you know? And I think when I was younger, my desire was just to take off the lens because I could also see how it would restrict me and restrict my view. And then I thought that there's a bigger reality out there. I want to take part in this bigger reality. And now I'm kind of thinking like, it may be the case that at the fringe edges, this is something that people can partake in. I definitely don't feel rattled by it personally. I'm happy I did it. I would do it again. I feel, you know, comfortable where I am medically. Like I like.
You have to wake up. You have to grow up, right? Like you have to
right.
everywhere, and that's good. You don't want to take that away.
Right. But then there's just this understanding that the lens is also helpful in, you know, honing your view in such a way that you can move through life and actually accomplish your goals and actually come to a shared understanding as a people and as a culture. So I do think about, you know, what this lack of a shared mythos means for our ability to do things together, you know, our ability to accomplish anything together. And whether, you know, even now that we have these religions, this new religious revival, it seems that it's still very individualistic, right? Like it's everyone's sort of picking and choosing. Like if I were to go into religion, maybe I would pick Mormonism, you know, like is there something about like the hard work and like the positivity
to cocaine? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I do notice that, you know, I notice people kind of shopping around for a faith that really suits their personality, and the vision that, you know, for life, you know, like what they see as being a life. Well,
there's a business to a consultancy for tech bros where with like LSD trips and Big Five testing and, you know, undergoing a very mild version of some kind of Navy SEAL physical test, we choose a religion for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that, so I think there is something to be said about something being chosen for you, that lens being chosen for you, because even the act of choice is in itself a lot of work, and it adds a sense of second guessing, so when it is that you're going through a tough time in life and you're seeking the shelter of something, if it is something that you have chosen for yourself, it might feel as if, oh, well, maybe I chose wrong. Maybe this interpretation is not the right interpretation. And then you sort of second guess yourself. So intellectually, I'm just playing around with the idea, but I think that there's a value to some things not being chosen for you, in order so that you can go further in life, in order that you can face the hurdles that day-to-day life brings, and accomplish
I
something
get
else.
that marriage is like getting tenure. Like, you don't have to worry about this thing anymore.
Well, I mean, another way of hey, marriage. Look, marriage versus romantic marriage and arranged marriage, right? Like there are different kinds of marriages, and yes, there is, arranged marriages are very restrictive. They can be very abusive. Many people have horrible experiences with them. I am glad that my parents did not force me into an arranged marriage. That could have been a future for me had they stuck around in Pakistan and not moved to the United States. I'm glad that didn't happen. Having said that, there's a different kind of foundation that an arranged marriage can build. That romantic marriage can be a little bit, it's a little bit like quicksand in that sense. Like, okay, now we're out of love. What now? Maybe we move on, and it's hard to build a life on less firm ground, and arranged marriage is definitely like, too bad you have no choice. You're with this person forever. So get along, like find a way to make it work and move on, like have your children, get educated, whatever it is that you need to do. So maybe that's offensive.
Can you imagine 2012 Sarah Haider saying this?
Well, I'm not, again, I don't want it to be like I'm for arranged marriages now, but I'm thinking about the value of the unchosen, as we face a world in which everything is a choice, and I really have been thinking so much about, especially for young women, because I engaged in a lot of those conversations when I had a podcast with Megan Daum. We talked a lot about like the plight of younger women, and they just feel as if they're lost and they don't have any partners and they don't know what, they want to experience life and live in the world, but they all have these biological restrictions, and they're very like angry and anxious about the impositions of other people. And I understand, what they're going through, and it feels as if they're in this position where, everything is permitted, but nothing seems possible, and that is a modern phenomena. That is something that we will have to grapple with. We have to find some kind of a solution through it, because I think it leaves so many people in a paralyzed state.
I mean, we had Christine Amba. She did, I think, 2 interns excellence. Her book Rethinking Sex is really, really great, but kind of introducing an Aristotelian virtue ethics consideration into modern dating, respect, decency. Sign me up. But we also have, feminism critiques from like Regan, Arns Gray, who comes from a rationalist point of view. I know you did a debate about it even with the Free Press, if I remember correctly, and you guys won, right?
I was for the sexual rebel. I mean, for and and we did win. That was great.
But I wonder if the kind of gentle and charitable interpretation of what's going on, and especially if neo-Christianity does not get super hijacked by politics and doesn't become a kind of imposing state religion, is that young people going back to some form of religiosity without the restrictions, the parental abuse, etc., that's good. Like that there is a dialectic there where you can create a more modern, softer version. And then, you can maybe in 200 years, we will look back at this era and look at, all the religious access. And then there's this huge pushback against it, right? From the Enlightenment to Richard Dawkins, a straight line. And then people kind of drop back to a less, rejecting and more pluralistic view where every individual is as religious. I mean, we even see that with like threadwives and homemakers. And my friends who have kids tell me like, I just want to be home with my kid. And not as when I was 20, a woman could not say this.
Mm-hmm.
Same way as if somebody converted to a religion when I was in college, that you would have been sent to an asylum, like right away, like to a Victorian one, with the like no,
yeah,
like
sedated all day, right?
And now you can just like tweet about Jesus and then your VC investments, and everybody's like, sure, good morning to you as well. Like,
yeah,
what is here to see? Let's talk a little bit before we wrap up just about your organization and what's going on with ex-Muslims today in America. You hear a lot of different competing ideas about this. Within Interintellect, there are a couple of people doing cultural Muslim meetups, which I think is super interesting. So their response to cultural Christianity, or what Peter Thiel says about this, which is that he's religious but not spiritual, which I absolutely love. There are Muslims who
that is such an interesting way of thinking about it, right? Like, there are people who are totally horrified by it too, but I don't really understand it, but I think it's great, and I think it's interesting. Like, it's something new that we have. Yeah, it was.
Are there cultural Muslims? Is that a thing?
I think maybe there can be. I've always thought that there was something, and look, I'm a particular kind of person. Not everybody's like me, and that has been part of me growing up. Has been recognizing that.
That's why we love you. There's nobody like you.
Well, I mean, everyone's a special snowflake, but also that there are some things that I can tolerate and I can't tolerate, and other people are not like me in that regard. And for me, there's a kind of if there's a logical inconsistency, it is like any emotionally pacifying effect of the idea will be washed away by that inconsistency, so I can't experience those benefits until I have that consistency, and that might just be like a personal flaw, right? Because now I can't take part in this like interesting, contradictory, but like that doesn't mean that it can't be useful and that it can't be good and that it can't lead to us knowing more about the world, right? So it might be a personal flaw. Having said that, I think that part of me recognizing, going back a little bit into our conversation and what you mentioned about the roots of humanism and the roots of our modern conception of human rights, and recognizing that where does this like sense of equality come from, and what did Locke have to do with it, and did it come from religion with him? And it was when I was investigating that from the lens of somebody who wanted to introduce more human rights into the Muslim world that I started hitting this limit. And I started recognizing how important more these foundational myths can be, in that they can permit or obstruct a certain way of thinking, right? So from my understanding, which I held then and I still hold now, that there is something about the mythos, the Islamic mythos, that permits certain kinds of organizing, and they do a great job, and then that does not permit other kinds of organizing as well. And the logic of that mythos, I think it obstructs a coherent development of a human rights discourse, and in particular a civil liberties discourse, in particular freedom of speech and freedom of religion. I think that is going to be something that it will always be, there's always going to be a tension there that is going to be difficult for Muslim societies to resolve. Having said that, that doesn't mean it's impossible. That just means it might take a different shape than the shape that it takes here, right? I mean, we've existed for a long time. There have been many societies, many other kinds of civilizations have come up with kind of similar ways of thinking about human freedom. Not exactly the same, but maybe it's passable. Maybe it's something that can work. So I'm not closed off to the idea of any possibility. But as it stands, I think that there is a tension there. Whether that means that Muslims who live in Western societies can, be culturally Muslim, sure they can. I think they can, sure. So long as they exist in a a world that thinks in a little bit different way. I think that is definitely something that is achievable for them.
There's a secularization amongst American Muslims or Muslim Americans, right? I mean, Ryan Burge, I think he was him. No, not as fast developing, obviously, as the Christian secularization. But I'm really curious. I mean, obviously, this is kind of like ion territory. But do you think that like a religious American Muslim, and I know it's crazy to group such a diverse, religious community under one banner, but I mean, they all identify as Muslims, let's say. Do you think that they are more influenced by cultural trends within America? Or is there this like much feared external influence of whatever is going on in, Middle Eastern or Northern African countries? Is this like an insular kind of incubation form of development within America, where the American Muslim has their own journey and their own kind of cultural history? Or is this like the kind of, I mean, Ayan's views are obviously extreme here, and she sees, French Muslims as kind of like sleeping cells of some global conspiracy, which I think most French Muslims would find quite funny. Where is the truth on this spectrum?
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on the culture of the country that the Muslims are immigrating into and the conditions in which they immigrate. I mean, that's kind of an obvious answer. But I think that it has led to an interesting kind of balance in the United States. And I think that's why Muslim communities tend to be so much more secular, so much more tolerant than they are elsewhere, particularly in Europe. I think that, I mean, we're verging onto the realm of like discussing immigration policy, like in terms of thinking about cultural integration and immersion.
Other thing happening on the internet these days, there's Steven Pinker, bunch of people converting to Christianity, and the immigration debate.
And the immigration debate,
Asia,
right.
I have time to discuss.
Right, and it's a big one. And I mean, I'm an immigrant to the United States. I mean, I would call myself first generation or second generation. I think that you are first generation.
You are 1.5.
I'm 1.5. Right. I'm 1.5 in that I came when I was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I came when I was an older child, and then I spent my teenage years in the United States, but I didn't immediately have my citizenship. So there was some time in my life, and it happened to coincide when I was actually thinking about leaving my religion, that the possibility of maybe not being permitted to stay in America forever, maybe something would happen, I wouldn't get my citizenship, and I'd be shipped back to Pakistan. So that was always, as I was growing up, it was part of my mindset, and it colored my relationship with America, in that the possibility of never being here was always present. It was always present. That specter was always haunting me, and it allowed me to, I think, appreciate aspects of the United States that, I think it's easy for people to take it for granted if they're, like born and raised here.
They complain all about it. And I'm like, why are you talking?
Yeah.
Like, people literally give their lives to come here. And also you complaining, you're still here. But it's super funny that Pakistani Sarah comes to America, and part of your assimilation basically into the more secular kind of American culture is thanks to a British scientist activating you as the sleeper cell for new atheism. It's just there's something delightfully 19th century about it.
Hey, and and I think it's an interesting debate, and I wish we could have it with a more scientific perspective, because we actually have so much information about the immigration waves in the United States and how they happened, and I think we can have a more sober view that is also compassionate to the immigrants in question. My view is that yes, we've been seeing like huge waves of immigration in the United States. Like there has been something, it is new, it is huge. The numbers are, they can be kind of shocking if you're not familiar with them. And that it hasn't happened in quite some time in United States history, but it has happened before. And I think we should be thinking about what the country did when it was integrating these the immigrants in waves past. I think it might be wiser actually to be a little bit more restrictive in the short run, at least. And I think that was kind of a key to success with previous waves of immigration. And this is going to get me a lot of heat, but I think there's data to back it up. I think there's a reason behind it, in the sense that you need the new wave to come and to fully integrate, to see themselves as Americans, to raise their children here, and for their children to raise their children here, and to have this sense of themselves as American. If you have a constant stream trickling in of the diaspora, like if you have like Pakistan really coming in all the time, then that creates a different kind of a social pressure. That creates a different social climate. And I experienced it growing up in the sense that there was the strong pressure from the society around me to integrate. Like my American friends, I didn't want to be embarrassed when I went out with them. I wanted to know what they were doing. I wanted to participate in their whatever traditions, like go to prom and do this and whatever. So that these were things that this is a society I want to be a part of. And there were strong incentives for me to do what I could to integrate and be a part of it. Of course, a lot of people think of this in a negative way. They just think, okay, now you're erasing the cultural beauty, blah, blah, blah. I don't agree with them. I think you need to share. There's a lot that you need to share, and it is all in all good to share it. But then if you have sort of the tap, the immigration tap that's still running, it's still open, you have new immigrants coming into that community, into the Pakistani community. So I had the incentive of my American friends at school, in my social environment, and then I had the Pakistani community that I was also a part of, that was also able to leverage their own kinds of pressure, and the social mores of a society that, is technically so far away, but with the new immigrants that are like constantly coming in, they're also providing their own pressure. They're bringing in the social mores from that country over this country. So I think
it's like,
integration
what is your core identity, right? Because the American ideal is very like ancient Roman, that your primary identity is as an American, but then you are also you have also joined, or you're part of all these other groups that make your life worth living, right? So you have your family, and you have your golf buddies, or your whatever CrossFit friends, and then you have your religious community, and then you have the charity of whatever you're doing. And then you have this kind of portfolio of communities that you belong to, all under the same, or in the same bucket.
Right. And then there's nothing wrong with having a conception of American Islam that's separate from Islam as a whole, and that's separate from the full American identity. But the important thing is that the immigration, the community is allowed to develop this unique identity of being both Muslim and American, and to perform the analysis that will work for them, where they can balance the trade-offs and reconcile with the tensions, however it is that they feel as if they must, in order to get by in this society and thrive in this society. It's harder to develop this unique identity, this integrated identity of American Islam, if you constantly have Pakistani Islam coming in, and introducing the perspective and pressures of a totally different society. And I think that is part of why the immigration crisis is, or the immigration situation, the integration situation in parts of Europe is so bizarre, because there was just a constant, influx.
With
And I
weak
think it's
institutions, right? Like
with weak institutions, right?
And I used to live in France, and I went to school there, and it was shocking to me. It was in 1999 that in a French high school you don't even see a cross.
Mm-hmm.
Can't send your child in France laicite, as the biggest the French secularism, which is not synonymous with secularism. Like laicite is this very particular thing, and you can't wear, a hijab, you can't wear a cross, you can't wear a kippah, you can't wear any religious marker in a state school, because their social contract is that we will educate your child for free as the state, which means that there are no uniforms in most cases, but you can't differentiate or add any religious symbol to your child, including a tiny pie or whatever. Like there's nothing. Or you're very free to send your child to a religious school and pay for it. Or whatever they wash their hands.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's so interesting that on paper, and I think this is where the whole collapse of, or at least this partial collapse of new atheism, when it actually faces the human reality, becomes so interesting, that on paper, laicity sounds amazing. Like I went to high school in France, and you are like, it's as enthralling as American civics education. Like this is a civic religion. I had a big fight with Richard Tanania about this on Twitter once. Like the reason why French people are not so au courant when it comes to American civic history is because they have their own, and they spend inordinate amounts of time learning about their own republic and how it works. And it works great on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Of course, you have all these post-colonial ideas and how all the tensions will be resolved, under the benevolent wings of laicity. And then it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
There are people there with the charts,
Yeah. Right.
Or really bad things happen. And they're like, yeah, but look at the paper. Look at the paper. It makes all sense.
Right.
Where do you talk about it?
Yeah, yeah. And I wish that it's just such a difficult conversation to have. And I think the past couple of weeks on Twitter, it's not to do with what we're talking about, but just immigration broadly.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of hostility and frankly, like racist, like bigotry against Indian Americans in the past couple of weeks. It's been very alarming to see. It's been very alarming. At the same time, I feel as if, I have the controversial view that mass migration or immigration, whatever, is not in itself a bad thing. Like I think it can be totally something that revitalizes the country.
Yeah.
But and here's a condition. The condition is you have to turn the tap off, because I think you have to let the country rest, and you have to let it have the battles that it needs to have to find that balance again, that cultural balance and understanding again. That conversation needs to be had within the new population in the country and the natives, and they need to have some time, some space. Okay, we need to give them some space, and then let them have the conversation and digest the new ideas or influences that the other is bringing, and come to a kind of a balanced state. And so for me, it's not a either or. It's in what condition, like what is the condition of the country at the moment, and can it handle more, or is it time to ease up on the
at least
on the strain
the rules a little bit, because I'm sensing when you're talking about the tap, you're talking about maybe very religious people whose values might be antithetical to liberal democracy, and not necessarily the, I don't know,
high-skilled immigration. Yeah, I think
engineer from the Netherlands.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with the high-skilled immigration. For the most part, and it matters, right? It matters even if you have when we're thinking about this from the perspective of like terror, which is like really invigorates, gets the blood going and stuff. But you can just have people who think very differently, and they have very different value system. It doesn't align with ours, and it needs to find its balance. It needs to come into alignment, and that has successfully happened in American history many, many times. I was reading up on like how Catholics were integrated into the United States, and initially the Catholics were looked upon as, a true threat to the fabric of the country. They were not trusted. Papists
were considered a different race somehow.
Right. I mean, and this was even before that. I mean, this was like when the Irish were coming in, and they were bringing in their Catholicism, and it was considered to be something that was a threat to the fabric of the country. And the truth is like it's easy to laugh about it and say they were wrong in thinking that. I don't think they were wrong in thinking that. I think they that really was a challenge to where the country was at the moment and how it saw itself. And now you had these newcomers who thought very differently. They needed some time to come to, to get to know each other, to integrate, and I think that's
because they also needed time when they turned back the Jews who were then exterminated. It's like,
right.
When we talk about a tap, who's what gets closed off, who gets to do it, how much information we have. There are a lot of follow-up questions, but I understand the underlying sentiment, which is, and I do agree that some areas of Europe can be a kind of cautionary tale here, because I am also pro mass immigration, but you have to have a strong institution to, from education to policing to health, housing, to receive people.
And if you don't have it, then it's time to evaluate.
Yeah, and I just don't. And the problem is not just radicalization. The problem is it's the native population gets radicalized, and there is a backlash. And there are more backlashes, I think, than there's immigrant crime, or there are more casualties to the backlash usually than to immigrant crime. And there's just something that should be on everybody's minds, and that a country like America would never benefit from any kind of xenophobia, because its entire philosophy, economy, and psychology is based on its openness, and it's the new Rome. And always has trade and newcomers. I think this might be a good moment to just take my little poll that I always ask my guests at the end, which is, and oh my God, I have to adjust the year because I used to ask this with 2024, and in 1.5 days, it's going to be 2025, which is kind of insane. So Sarah, if this is 2030 and we look back upon this year, what is something that you think will be obvious in hindsight, but right now it's only obvious to you, other than the fact that we are very good at the Cheesecake Factory and the Godiva chocolate is great?
Oh my gosh, this is a tough question, because I don't know what is obvious to me at the moment. I don't know nothing seems obvious. Everything seems like there's like so many open questions. I don't even know how I could. Yeah, I don't know how I could do that. I mean, I feel as if, we didn't talk about it on this podcast, but I had an experience with ayahuasca recently, and that's part and parcel of this. Let's figure things out. Let's see what there is.
Tell me about it. I know you wrote a very, very, very short post about this. I was like, there is more there.
There's a lot there, but it's almost as if there's too much to talk about, and then you have this like feeling of embarrassment with like psychedelics. The way it's like telling somebody about your dream, like you just kind of feel like a fool for talking about it.
So embarrassing.
But hey, I feel it. I'm like, I feel silly writing this. I feel silly talking about it. Nevertheless, I think there's, there is, I am optimistic. I mean, you touched on that, earlier, but what is there to be optimistic about? And I feel like there's a lot of growth and movement, and it seems painful because that's what growth is. Like growth is painful. It's like it's easy to romanticize it when you're done and now you're super strong and
we are can handle some immigrants. We are like, it's going to be hurt, but it's going to be good for you.
But it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good. I think this to me, like the ability to talk about these issues. I mean, even the immigration debate that was so like hostile, and there were some ugly sentiments there. I think it was good that it was had, and I hope that we can be, open about these issues, even as it's painful to voice them. Because I mean, I come from that free speech perspective. I do not think that it is better if uglier sentiments are underground rather than, just displayed out in the open. There are risks to that as well, but I think it is better on the whole that we're having these conversations.
I love this. And I remember just from maybe 10 years ago, and maybe this to some degree overlapped or coincided with the new atheist kind of peak discourse. Everything was about complacency and stasis and how, this history is done with and over, and, we are stagnating. And I don't think that's true anymore. Like, I think people wake up in the morning and they're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Everybody's
actually.
Core question in the morning. Like, what is going on?
Yeah. If anything, it's too much change, too fast, too many choices, too many things to think about, and not enough time to do it. Which is fascinating as well, given the fact that we have, unlimited information, and even this ability to synthesize it via, AI. Yeah. And what's amazing is that even that is a stressor in itself, just having so much information to deal with day after day, and to like bring it in, and now I have to think about it.
Like the Portland episode, like, did you read it? Did you read it? Did you read it? Did you read it?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm always spending time reading now. When do I live life? When do I move on?
Bend the territory. Sarah, there's so much to be optimistic about. And maybe in 2 years, we will have a conversation about how it turned out that neo-religion was somehow a kind of aspect of this need for optimism.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is some kind of hope in religion, as far as not, in as much as, there is forgiveness of sin and some kind of for future if you do it right. So it might be somehow connected. I have to think about this. Thank you so much for being here. And once again, for the chocolate cake in the Cheesecake Factory, I feel like it hasn't.
I feel so terrible that was what I introduced to you, but it was good. And you know what? You didn't eat it. You didn't eat the rest of it. I ate the rest.
I mean, yeah, because
later
I'm still adjusting to kind of the calories in America. I'm new. I'm like,
this
bites of the food.
You need,
I'm like, that
you need some time. Yeah.
Worse.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and I felt like, oh my God, I'm doing this like
now you're American
thing that I normally only see on The Big Bang Theory, and it was it's exotic, Yeah,
20,000 calories in one cheesecake. It's amazing. It's a monument to the American spirit. What we can accomplish.
Sarah, thank you so much for being here. And oh my God, what a dense and beautiful conversation. And thank you for sharing things, even things where you're like, I don't know yet. It's amazing. And I hope that you will continue to show the way to other people that you can think about this stuff. You can change you can, see the cracks in the golden ball if you have to, even if you've been holding it for a long time. And it's the most beautiful thing about humans, to reinvent themselves and rethink things.
Yeah, thank you for this beautiful conversation. And this is a lovely way to end my year.
I mean, don't jinx it. There's still one day left.
Oh God! Oh no! Okay, no, but I'm optimistic. You know what? I'm optimistic. I think this is going to be good.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for everybody who watched or listened to our conversation. Here's to more.
Bye-bye.
Bye.